Hello, and welcome to another episode of Open Studio. I'm your host, Martina Flor, and in this show, I have honest conversations with artists, designers, and creatives to uncover their story and the specific tactics they use to build a successful career around their skills and the work they love doing. Today, I'll be having a conversation with Karan Singh, an artist and illustrator living in Melbourne, Australia. His distinct work is a contemporary and playful combination of op art and mid-century graphic design. Through restricted yet vibrant color palettes and hypnotizing patterns, he explores and exploits our perception of depth and movement. His art lives in an eclectic variety of mediums, including prints, animation, video, augmented reality, puzzles, sculpture, and clothing. Over his professional career, he has lived in a number of cities, including Tokyo, New York, Amsterdam, Malmö, Sydney, and Melbourne, where he has worked with the likes of the Oscars, NASA, Apple, Louis Vuitton, the New York Times, and Nike. I'm so happy to be kicking off a new season with one of the most interesting conversations I have had on this podcast. Karan is not only an exceptional artist, but also a person that has traveled the world and gone through tons of experiences. During the show, he shared his journey from being a self-taught artist to moving countries several times, through battling cancer and finally doubling down on his goal to become an illustrator and creating an extraordinary bulk of work. Karan spoke about how pursuing authenticity and being genuine help him create long-lasting connections and attract the right opportunities in both his personal and professional life. He was really open to talk about imposter syndrome and how to overcome it, and even share his own tactics to land dream assignments. It is really not so common to find a top artist that is also willing to share the nitty-gritty of getting to that point in your career. But Karan did that and more in this episode. Enjoy this conversation with Karan Singh. So, hi Karan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I am trying to stay as warm as possible. But I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to chat with you. And Karan, I don't like to let my listeners waiting, and I normally like to start with a pearl of wisdom from our guests. So if, by scrolling through your website, any designer or illustrator or any of our listeners will agree with me when I say that you have created several dream assignments for dream clients. So I want to start with this question. How does an artist land dream assignments?
That's a great question. I don't know the exact science behind it. I wish I could tell you the exact science behind it. I think in hindsight, I would probably say it's just out of persistence and constantly just sharing your work and sharing it often. And, there's a variety of factors, being a part of a community, but also developing a visual aesthetic that people can associate with an individual. And I think, to be honest, it was also a combination of timing as well, where I managed to ride a wave where my work was like trendy or popular, or it was just, there was definitely this seminal moment where there was a lot of appeal in the kind of stripped back simplicity and pattern based work that I was doing, that it just kind of managed to go from there. And then I guess there is also like a bit of a domino effect where if you work with one client, another client almost looks at it as a validation. And if it's a big enough client, so like hypothetically you work with client A, and client A is a very big company, client B can look at that as a precedent and say, hey, this person can work with a larger brand or has worked with a larger brand. And that almost just kind of creates this sort of snowball effect. And I guess that's part of what's created the momentum in a way.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said, that you mentioned, when I look at your work, I can totally see what you're talking about. That is this simplicity, this, kind of simple shapes and lines that come together and colors, right? So, and you mentioned that there was a seminal moment where people felt really compelled by this kind of imagery. And it's still going on, I think, right? And I wonder if this is something that you pursued on purpose, or this is something that just happened? You were more drawn to create this kind of artwork, and there was a market for it, and suddenly both things met.
Yeah, that's a good question because I think that for me, I think I can only call it a seminal moment in hindsight. Only when I look back, I'm like, oh, actually, that was really good timing between what I was making and what became sort of in vogue, I guess, for lack of a better description. But for me, a lot of that work came from a want to simplify, and I think a want to reduce my work. I think for me, whenever I feel a bit lost or confused or directionless, I've just found the best thing to do is simplify and to reduce, because then you can concentrate on the few ingredients. And I think that, when I first started working with pattern and, these reduced color palettes, that I could really focus on the composition and the color scheme and the elements within it. And I think prior to that, I was so focused on this kind of antiquated idea of the longer that you spend on a piece, the better it is, or the more detailed something is, the better it is, which, to be honest, isn't like a mentality that like was compatible with me. Like I can kind of be impatient, and I can't spend a long amount of time on work. So I found that I just needed to kind of create work that suited my personality a little bit more, and that was more a case of like, okay, well, you're impatient and you like simpler colors and don't necessarily have the interest in like hyper realism and details. So for me, it was just all about, funny, quirky ideas and conveying them in really bold and simple ways. And, going back to your question about the seminal moment of that, that cross section between it getting picked up and me making it, it was more a kind of, the seminal part of that moment was that I had started making the work that reflected me the most. And that's what felt seminal about it. It's that I wasn't trying to pretend to, mimic some of my heroes as much. It was more that I had tried to represent myself and my personality in a visual style. And I think that's sort of where things started to pick up.
That's interesting because, one would say that the more I work, the more I put effort into creating my art or my artwork, the more value it has, right? And in your case, it was sort of the opposite when you started simplifying the kind of work you were doing, and perhaps even spending less time at creating each one of the artworks. Yes.
Yeah, I would say that's like it's twofold, because it meant I could make more work. It meant that like I would finish work quickly, but it didn't mean that I would make less. If anything, I made much more work back then, because I think I just got addicted to both the process and then also the satisfaction of completing something. So to a certain degree, it was like, instead of spending 3 weeks on one piece, I would spend 3 weeks on 30 pieces.
That's great,
and they would be much simpler. But I would also, I think this is the other thing, is like drawing a line under a piece or an image or whatever is really good, because it adds a conclusion or finality to a piece. It allows you to say, okay, that's done. I move on. What did I learn from that experience? And how can I iterate? How can I make it better in the next one? And I think by adapting to that style of working, it really just helped me, I guess, just just develop the style a bit quicker rather than obsess over the kind of minutiae involved there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of defining or finding your style through having a lot of output, right? And kind of finishing up pieces so that you can learn from that and move on to the next one and do it better, right? So I want to move on to like, how do you, perhaps you can recall a story of how did you gain some of those clients, or how did you got some of those dream assignments that you can see on your website, and you can pick up on any of those. But I'm curious about the background, like the backstage of that. How did you get from getting that assignment to sitting at your desk drawing in your computer and kind of
That's a great question. I think it's definitely a snowball effect because, you know, I returned to freelance, I would say. So I had like two phases of freelance. One was not very successful at all. And then kind of after working at a kind of agency, that it kind of my understanding of work became better, and I guess I had a bit more of a visual style by then, that I was a bit more prepared to go to freelance. And yeah, I think you know that second phase of freelance is definitely where the balance definitely reached a tipping point where my freelance started to interfere with my studio job, and I realized, okay, well, this is a good place to be in. I can safely kind of make that jump between those two worlds. But there were definitely projects that came along during that period that said, hey, maybe this could happen. So it was a really, really simple, I want to say really simple, but I'm not trying to play it down. It was for Adobe, but it was a really cool project for a campaign they were doing a really long time ago. And I still wish I knew how they found me, but I think that was like deep in my phase of like reduction and working with pattern. And I would speculate that maybe it was also in the early days of Instagram. So I had started posting my work on Instagram. It's funny because I used to be like such an Instagram purist. I'm like, no, only post photos on Instagram. And then eventually I was like, screw it, I'm just going to start posting images, illustrations on Instagram. And I think I was also there at a point where, it was still a relatively new medium platform that illustrators weren't necessarily on as much. And I think, a couple of things happened at that time. I was sharing my work on Behance quite a lot. I was sharing my work on Instagram quite a lot. And Instagram was also trying to facilitate, a creative community. So I remember getting featured by Instagram and that sort of boosted my followers up. And I got a lot of followers back in 2000 and I want to say 15 or whatever, 14. And I think also at the same time I'd started working with GIFs. So I was posting on Tumblr a lot, and I got featured on Tumblr as well on their radar, which is like, that thing that everybody sees. And so it was just, again, this idea of, I guess I was making, my output was really high and I was sharing my work often and I was sharing it on a variety of mediums. So, I would maybe predict that probably Behance is where Adobe, found my work, and then through Adobe, then it was like another project for ASICS, and then I think the kind of precursor is definitely that one of the Adobe projects where then it got featured on Behance, and then there was another project which was for Sagmeister and Walsh, which really kind of brought my pattern work into the foray and exposed everyone to this, or rather it brought that work to a broader audience. And then, it just sort of started ballooning even more as I just continually, perpetually shared my work on as many mediums and platforms as possible and interacted with people as well. Tried to kind of, people whose work I admired, I used to tell them I liked their work and just build kind of friendships as well. But sort of haven't really answered your question in so many ways. I think it's a weird kind of thing to pinpoint, but even to this day, like, I got to do the Academy Awards last year, which was unreal for me because somehow every year I still, I'll get an amazing project in and I'll be like, oh, this is it, I'm done, I'm over, like I've reached everything. Like, so for me, at the point where I got the first job for Adobe, I was like, oh, dream come true. And then, Sagmeister and Walsh will, this amazingly famous studio, and I was like, oh, this is it. And then, you just keep going up this ladder, and then, I got the Oscars email, and I was, I have this little subfolder in my emails, which is just called like all-time favorite emails, and I think I keep that and I just kind of log the like really special ones where, you know, people who are really nice to you, or you know, just you want to kind of capture a specific email. And yeah, definitely the Oscars one was like one that went straight in there, where they were like, hey, do you want to like work with us? And I was like, oh God, I don't really know how I can go much. I don't know where this could go from here, but yeah, it's just snowballed.
I love it. Now I'm very curious to see this all-time favorite emails folder.
Yeah, it's a mix of like random things. Yeah.
So I want to go back. Actually, I want to go to the roots and speak a little bit about, I'm definitely going to circle back to your experience as a freelancer and this first attempt, not successful attempt to freelance. But first I want to go to the roots and kind of ask you, how was your life growing up, and how does your family look like?
Yeah. So I have, I have an older brother, and my parents and my brother and I used to live in the Middle East in a country called Oman, and we moved to Australia when I was about 10.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was just essentially just immigrant kid who was just trying to fit in. I wasn't really good at school. I wouldn't say I was great at school. I liked things. I liked drawing, but I was terrible at it, and I just didn't have the patience for it. But was like still really jealous of people who could draw. I just couldn't be bothered to actually sit down and draw myself. I think that's probably just called like laziness, or I think I got like into computers in high school and realized I could draw on a computer, and you know, it was just like I just kind of got hooked from there, and everything about a computer and drawing became really addictive. And you know, my family doesn't necessarily come from an arts background, but you know, my mum has a real passion for art, and my dad is he's a bit of a handyman, so he's like he likes working with his hands. So I want to say it was a combination of them. I feel like that's a good diplomatic way of saying it without either of them trying to take all the credit. But yeah, so there aren't really any artists in my family, so I guess it was a completely foreign concept. But you know, they always appreciated that I was just interested, and you know, at first were confused by it, but then eventually realized that there's jobs for this. You know, I mean, so yeah. When I went off to university, I think they were more just happy that I went to university and was doing something, and as long as I got
He's out of the house.
Exactly, he's out of the house. He's feeding himself. That's great. What more could you ask for? So yeah, it's a very kind of to be honest, a very middle class upbringing where not a whole lot of exciting things, interesting things happen, but yeah, it was more just sort of discovering the computer and building friends online. I had a lot of online friends who, you know, are still friends of mine now, who we were all just in high school, like little computer nerds at home, making pictures and sharing them with each other and giving each other critique. And that's really where a lot of this started.
And was there any resistance from your family when you decided to go down the road of creativity and design?
No, not at all. I was really lucky because I guess, you know, the kind of cliche Indian family thing is that they want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, but I didn't encounter any of that at all. I think my parents probably had their own kind of experiences and maybe resistance with their parents. I feel like every child does with their parents over some issues. And so, you know, when it came to me choosing a vocation, it was just, you know, they were like, as long as you're happy doing whatever you're doing. And yeah, I think, as long as I could put a roof over my head and pay the bills, that's, you know, and obviously wasn't breaking any laws, that's fine, you know. So yeah, no, thankfully I really didn't. I think, to be honest, I think more of the, I wouldn't say resistance, but more of the uncertainty came from being, you know, self-taught, you know, because the degree that I did was not a graphic design degree or not a classical illustration or art degree. It was more of like a computer science degree. And I think that it was definitely like a, you know, this institution of schooling was definitely something that, I didn't feel confident enough to feel like I could have a career in this because I was self-taught. And I think there were a couple of other factors, you know, like all my work's digital. So, you know, definitely much more at that time, you know, this idea of being a digital illustrator was, you know, definitely had these connotations of cheating, or, you know, you're cheating using a computer. So I think if anything, that established more kind of, you know, imposter syndrome and anxiety than anything else.
That's interesting because I'm in touch a lot with other artists and creatives, and I work a lot with designers. But there's often this question of those that are self-taught, that they experience the same that you seem to have experienced. And I wonder when did you feel that you got over it? Like you definitely started believing
Last
that you
week,
could.
Maybe. I don't know. Are you classically trained in art and design?
I am trained.
Okay.
I'm a graphic designer. Yes. And
okay, cool.
Yes.
But I imagine to a certain degree, every designer has in some sense of imposter syndrome. I think to a large degree, especially because the work that we do is so like personal. And I think that because you're reflecting yourself in such a way that, you're almost like a little vulnerable because of the work that you're putting down. You're like, this is the extent of my abilities and I'm showcasing it to the world. So I think that I've just gotten better, and maybe this is the same for you. I've just gotten better, you know, sort of dialing that voice back.
Yeah.
It's still there. And, you know, I often say, you know, even to my wife, who is my quality control manager and, you know, shrink and, or, you know, I'm like, you know, I often say, I'm like, you know, if it wasn't this kind of weird combination of anxiety and persistence, that I think I would have given up, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's a healthy balance there. It's all about how you channel it. So I think as I've grown, it's just become a bit more of a managed anxiety, with healthy anxiety, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's such a thing. I just coined that, but just, you know, found a way to tone it down.
Yes, in a way, it sounds more like a call that even if this imposter syndrome is there and this fear is there, it doesn't stop you from just going for it, right? So, and you keep on trying anyways, because
I don't know. I think that's the other thing is the like, you keep on trying. It's like, I don't know where the addiction to it comes from, or maybe it's just the joy of making it, and the satisfaction of finishing it, and then you just want to do it again and again. And I don't know, because the thing is, it's not like a sport, you know, it's not like a game where we're competing against other, you know, it's not like we're, you know, playing a sport and you have to beat another designer at a specific sport or something like that. It's actually a game against yourself, you know. You're trying to just excel yourself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to ask you a little bit about what came after, because you went through this process of going to a university, getting a degree, kind of being self-taught in illustration. And I wonder what came after when you left the university. You had this is where the phase where you had this first failed attempt to freelance, or?
Sort of. I did my last year as an exchange student. I was living in Sweden, and that's where I met my wife. So we met, and then we're both Australian, and I moved back to Australia, and I'm from Sydney. You know, she was closer to Melbourne, so I moved down to Melbourne, and I was trying to just get a job, basically. And so I had this degree which I had finished, which was more to do with like coding, and had some like design experience, but most of my work was, you know, self-taught illustration, and I was trying to get a job. And,
were you trying to get a job in illustration, or you were still like hiding
I was just
behind
looking
like the
for a job.
a job.
I was looking for a job. I think, yeah, because this is the other thing is like, you know, at the time, I don't believe there were any dedicated illustration agencies or studios in Australia. The few that I knew of were all abroad, thinking of, I Love Dust and Vault 49 and Vasava and all these other places that were nowhere near me. And I was like, maybe I could go there. Well, yeah, I don't think anyone's going to hire you. And also illustration, yeah, was definitely my love, but I thought it was more realistic that maybe I would get a job in graphic design, even though I wasn't a qualified graphic designer. So I got, knocked back quite a lot because I was competing with graduates from graphic design, and I had a hand-drawn business card which looked ridiculous, but somehow there was this amazing kind of creative agency at the time who was just doing like motion and illustration and graphic design and 3D modeling, and like they were just very multidisciplinary, and I think they were very unique at the time.
What's their name?
They were called Cube Construct.
Cube Construct.
Cube Construct. And that was my first job, and it was honestly one of the coolest studios in Australia. And next minute I'm working there, and I was like, "Are you guys sure this is that I'm the?" But yeah, that was awesome. I got to work in an office, and I got to get feedback from a creative director, and I was in the same room because all my feedback was always just online with these, friends who I had who I'd never met, and now I'm in, it was a very small studio. It was like 8 of us in the studio, and I was working with, like I said, a creative director, an art director, and there was accounts managers, and understanding, just this whole new understanding of how a project works, and budgets and hours and allocated time, and how to deal with feedback, and discussing how to present work to a client, all these things that I hadn't ever thought about or hadn't ever considered were part of this whole, commercial world. And
that's a school in itself, right?
Yeah, I learned more in the first, 3 months than I ever did anywhere else. I think it was just, and that's why, I have this mixed kind of feeling, especially like when it comes to schooling and graphic design, because I'm like, in hindsight, I didn't make it. Like, obviously, there are things that graphic design school probably would have taught me that, it would have been nicer to learn that earlier. But yeah, learning it on the job is always the most satisfying and enjoyable process.
And what came after that job? Were you already ready to go freelance and make it, try to make it as an illustrator, or, how was the process?
Yeah, no. So I'd only been at that job for about 18 months, and I got really sick. So I was diagnosed with cancer when I was like 21.
Wow.
And so basically I had to quit the job. I moved back up to Sydney, and my whole life basically changed altogether, and moved back in with my parents, and started having treatment, and basically did that for about a year of my life, and I basically completely reset. I started in the time that I had that job, obviously I was so focused on learning how to be a good employee, but I'd stopped illustrating, and that was really my favorite thing to do. And so I got better, thankfully, and I'm fine, I'm clear, and moved back to Melbourne. But this was my first attempt at maybe I should just focus on illustration, because this is the thing that makes me the happiest. And it was really difficult. It was because nobody knew who I was, and I'd also just taken this year off, and I don't know what it was. I think to a degree, illustration and commissions for illustration in Australia, at least from my experience, were still very much in their infancy. I feel like it was around that time that one of the first illustration agencies in Australia was set up, Jackie Winter, who I am still with to this day. You know, they were my first agent who took me on as like a junior illustrator, an upcoming illustrator in this like very small division. But generally speaking, you know, there wasn't much of a market, and you know, I didn't have any contacts abroad. You know, this is before Instagram or Twitter or even YouTube. Oh no, probably YouTube was around. But you know, all these things didn't exist, and you know, I was still probably, and I think from there I was like, you know, well, I've got a lot of time on my hands, so I started a daily project. You know, obviously Jessica Hish was super popular and obviously still is, but that was like her main, her kind of rise to prominence was through the daily drop caps, and I think, you know, the day everybody just started doing daily projects, and I was like, screw it, I'll do a daily project. And I think it was around that time that I had that kind of epiphany of making work that was more simple and reflected me. And so I created a daily project, which was called the Daily Quickies, which was, you know, I set myself an hour a day to make an illustration. It was just like a line work illustration, one color, but they were always about the idea. And so they were often like quite punny illustrations. And I think the idea was to stress test my conceptual abilities and just try and think less about the technical side of things and like how pretty can we make this, but what is the image actually saying?
Yeah.
And you know, it was often metaphors, and sometimes I wouldn't have any ideas. I'd just like draw something random like a shoe or a car, but it was a really rewarding project because you know, that self-initiated project got me noticed. Or you know, I actually applied at Vault 49, which is this illustration studio in New York, and I think I'd been through like a couple of interviews and then started showing them this self-initiated project, and they were like, that was the tipping point, because, you know, you showed us that more than just the technical abilities, that you could think of ideas and think of so many ideas on a daily basis. You know, you coming up with a single idea and executing it. And I think especially for any agency, that's an appealing idea, that a designer can come up with an idea, because constantly you're doing pitches and you know, concepting, and you want to come up with as many different options as an answer to a brief. And you know, to my creative director's credit, you know, he really saw the potential, because again, at that time I still didn't truly fully grasp the commercial viability of something like that. I think that was still something that I wouldn't grasp properly until I worked at Vault.
Yeah. You know what I hear from all the things you have been telling so far, that it seems that the closer you go to the things you really want to do, you know, when you were speaking about kind of dialing down your work into something more simple because it has a lot more to do with you, and how that led to a lot of opportunities and clients and projects that were really aligned with what you wanted to do. And it seems that in the moment you started also focusing on the kind of work you wanted to do back then, when you started doing more illustration, it really got you closer to the opportunities you wanted to get, right? So it seems that there's something really, like, there's something to learn there in terms of like, hey, you know, like getting closer to what you want to do and the things that that you're driven to, also bring opportunities your way, right?
For sure. I think, you know, in hindsight, the thing that I've learned from this experience is that authenticity is sort of hard to fabricate. You know, it's something so hard to mimic, and it just comes through when you're doing projects that you definitely are invested in and definitely feel really connected to. So, and I think that people are, people are really smart, and you know, they're pretty receptive to things that are like that, and you know, they can tell the difference.
Yeah, I want to go back shortly to your time where you got really sick. Was it this a time where you were able to produce work, or you had this space? Of course, you were very busy getting better yourself, right, and recovering. But was that a period where you had? So I have two questions. What was that a period where you found that you could create more work, And second, was that also like a wake up call in terms of like, hey, I have this space to think about what I want to do, in which direction I want to go?
Yeah, 100%. I think I often liken it now, like obviously we've all just been through the pandemic, and it's I feel like a lot of people have had this same epiphany. So I feel grateful to have had this sort of early epiphany when, like I said, I was 21, so I hadn't even really started my career.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really interesting, because to be honest, as much as I was like focusing on getting better, it was also really a boring time, because you're just kind of sitting around eating, just having medication, going to chemo, not having chemo, and then so I had a lot of free time. So yeah, I made a lot of work, but to be honest, the initial part of that was definitely just getting back into illustration, but it wasn't until I want to say halfway through that, or maybe later on in that period, where I started the freelance, where I was like, you've just been through all this and you're still making work that sort of reflects other people, maybe reflects work that kind of represents you more. So yeah, it was good. It was good to do that kind of almost that groundwork. So yeah, in a way, it was like a weird vacation. It's quite morbid and dark, but I often say it's like one of the best things to happen to me. My parents don't really like when I say that, but for me, I think personally, yeah, it was a huge change in my life.
I want to touch on what you just mentioned, which is when you started freelancing. You mentioned that when you really went deep into illustration was when you actually went solo. So tell me a little bit about those first months freelancing, and what was the decision making behind? What were the last month at a job, kind of being ready?
Do you mean like phase 2? Like the second phase of illustration?
Okay. So there was this phase one, and then
phase 1.
You felt that it really didn't pick up, and then you moved to New York to work in this studio. Remind me the name is Vault
49.
49, and after that is when you went freelancing, right?
Yeah. So I started freelancing after that, and so we decided, I say we because my wife and I, when we were living in New York, we had also been in New York.
By the way, heads off for your wife for going everywhere with you, because you lived in Tokyo and Sweden and Australia, and then back to New York, and then back to Australia. Is like amazing, really.
Yeah, so she is definitely like the real MVP here. I feel like you should be interviewing her. But I mean, when it's really, I don't know, serendipitous, I would say, because when I got the offer to move to New York, the company she was working at here in Australia. So her name's Ash. She's also a creative. So she started her career as a print designer, and then went into digital. So we sort of exchanged careers, because she would probably have been better off studying what I studied, and I would have been better off doing a degree remotely related to what I do for a living. But so at the time when I got offered my job in New York, she got offered a job for their office in New York, because they were also opening an office. So I didn't realize how it's unheard of that two people in a couple move to New York at the same time. People usually have to stagger it, and one person goes first, and the second one has to find a job. But we moved to New York together, so that was unreal that that she was able to accomplish that at the same time. And she also accomplished a lot of amazing things there. But after 4 years there, and she was ready for a new challenge, and I was ready for a new challenge. So we decided, okay, well, let's leave New York. And it was a perfect point for me, obviously, because then I wouldn't have a job, so I could go back to freelance.
Yeah.
And we decided to move to Tokyo, because she loves Japan, and obviously I love Japan too, but she had always really wanted to do a English language teaching course there. So yeah, we up and left New York and moved to Tokyo, and didn't know anybody and didn't speak the language, and I didn't have any clients, and she just had a high school which she would be teaching at 5 days a week, and that was it. So she went from essentially being a creative director at a agency to being an English high school teacher in the space of a couple of weeks. So it was a pretty surreal experience for the both of us, where we transplanted our lives so dramatically.
And together with that, you decided to go freelance for a second time, or give it a second opportunity to that?
I didn't have a chance. I didn't have an option. Well, I did. I think part of what motivated me is that we were like, okay, we're ready to do this. I'm ready to take the plunge into freelance. I'm really excited about this. And I think at the top of our call, I was talking about my freelance work had started to pick up, and was starting to interfere with my studio work. And I felt like the balance had sort of tipped, and I felt confident enough that, firstly, I had done a couple of things to prepare for it. I had, the rule that I was always told is try and save up 3 months of salary or income to make sure that, to account for the quiet months. And I had gone above and beyond and done 6 months because I really wasn't sure. And obviously I was moving to a new country. And so, I had just started freelancing there, and again, went into hyper promotion mode, where I was like sending or making lots of work and sending emails, and for the first few months it felt like a horrible mistake, because I was getting emails from New York based ad agencies that I really wanted to work for, and they were like, hey, can you come in for a meeting for a project? And I'm like, I don't live there anymore, and I would never hear from them again, because that's just, this is obviously pre-COVID, where
remote was not so common, right?
Remote's not sexy. So they wanted you there, but eventually I started to get work in, and it started to get consistent, and in a weird way, me being in Tokyo was actually quite hip and exotic in the same way that I was in New York, and I didn't really factor that in, but it became a really cool place for me to be, and it was a really creative community, and again, just snowballed and got to do some really cool projects while I was there.
So before we move on to another topic, I want to ask you, like, you mentioned that you were doing client outreach during that time, right? So, and I think that's so great to mention, because oftentimes we feel that although this is important as well to put your work out there, and you mentioned before that you were consistently putting work out there on Instagram, on different platforms, and this is one of the reasons that you feel that this is one of the things that called the attention of clients like Adobe, and later on snowballed into other opportunities, right? But I want to ask you, how was the process of doing client outreach as an artist?
Yeah, it's not sexy, to be honest. And I don't think it's intended to be. You're cold calling. You're sending emails into the ether with the hope that you hear something back. Or at the time Instagram was a thing, so I was DMing brands who I really liked, or agencies, and I was like, hey, really like your work. I think it'd be really fun to collaborate together. And I think it was a bunch of other things, like, having a reason to contact them. Like, I've just set up a new website, come check it out and check out my work, or have an excuse to go in and visit an agency in person to say, hey, I've made some new work, or I've just done a new project. Can I talk you through how I did it, or something like that? To be honest, it's very hit and miss, and I think it's really easy to get really down about it, because more often than, like, an email is so easy to ignore, and I think you just sort of have to be persistent with it. For me, there were a couple of people who I specifically targeted, especially like editorial based clients, because just from like a volume based approach, editorial work, you know, there's a lot more editorial work that needs to be done as opposed to larger campaigns. And so if I target editorial clients, then I'm more likely to get consistent work. And if I make a good impression and if I work really efficiently and come up with cool ideas, and they'll come back to me frequently enough. And then if the work is good, maybe they'll share it on their account. And this is the other thing, like, you know, there's the thing about like art directors and creative directors is they're the ones who need to see your work, and more often than not, art directors follow other art directors in the same way that illustrators follow other illustrators. And so this is sort of the kind of how the sausage is made, is like once you work with one art director, that they're like, or they either, you know, they share it on their feed and someone else sees it, or, you know, a magazine shares your work and it's being followed by a creative director from another magazine who's like, oh, I want to work with that. I want to work with that illustrator. Or, you know, a creative director might go from one publication to another, and they're like, hey, I'm here now. And so now you've got a new client. So it's just out of constantly, it's just about making connections, because to be honest, I think that's half the job. Is especially in commercial illustration. You know, fine art is a completely different beast, but commercial illustration is all about connections, and keeping in touch with people and sharing your work often.
Absolutely. And I feel I'm so glad that you brought it up, because you know, part of that snowball effect of art directors sharing your work and having other art director friends that come after, you know, they assign you with new projects. There's this first step that is you going after opportunities and not staying still, just waiting for them to come your way, and kind of making those connections. And I feel that, you know, oftentimes I get this question of like, okay, I'm an introvert, which, because many of us artists fall in the category.
I'm an introvert.
Yes. And I think it's so great what you just mentioned, because I think it's a lot about, and this is also something I say often, that is a lot about making those connections. And, you know, connecting with someone doesn't necessarily require of you talking like a parrot and just saying great things about yourself. Sometimes it's a lot more about listening and kind of being able to be present in a conversation and creating a real connection where the person will remind you, because you were so kind and so nice to talk to, that
I couldn't agree with that more. I think if the conversation is genuine and you're not trying to get something out of it, it's just like you're just trying to build a connection with someone else with no expectation of some service or goods that are exchanged, or there's no ulterior motives. You're just trying to connect with people. And that's what I mean, you know, when I say that, like, you know, one of my earliest kind of mentors told me that, you know, if you see someone's work, you should message them and just tell them that you like it, that's it. Like, it does. There's nothing. It's free. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? They tell you to go away, and even so, who would do that? You know, everybody likes a little feel good compliment, especially because, you know, we definitely live in an environment where we don't necessarily get to do that. You know, people can be. Especially as we're introverts, you know, sending an email is easier, you know, or sending a message is easier. So yeah, I 100% agree that it's all about real. I know it sounds really cliche, but like real connections.
Totally.
Connections without the intent of like trying to get some gain out of it. Yeah, those are the most rewarding ones, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to what you were talking about throughout the entire episode. That is, you know, going back to authenticity and kind of tapping into what is real for you, what is the kind of work you want to do, and approaching people in a genuine way, as you said. And this is what really helps you create connections, like personal connections, but also like commercial connections, and attract the clients you want to work with, and kind of get those dream assignments, right?
That's so true. I think, to be honest, most people just want to make nice work and want to work with like chill people, like relaxed people who are similar to them. I think I think just be nice and be friendly, and you know, I think those are the most fun projects, are the most laid back ones, right?
I love that. So we're wrapping up the episode now, and I want to ask you, what are the things and attitudes that you feel that had a leverage for you as an artist and had a big impact on your success? Because I can imagine that those listening right now and our listeners are certainly scrolling through your website and checking out your work. And I really want to ask you, what were the things, if you could name one or two, that you feel have a great impact in your career?
Yeah, I would just say travel, to be honest, is the biggest, most important thing for me. Obviously I've had the privilege of traveling and living in different places. But to be honest, getting out of your comfort zone and being around other people gives you so much more appreciation for different people. And I think as designers, artists, we should be so aware of that, because we're so in tune with the kind of subtleties and nuances of life. And that empathy that you build from travel and appreciating other cultures, other habits, other day-to-day lives, just makes you just appreciate the world in a different way. And again, that to be honest, it's built my own personality, which for me makes it easy for me to just talk to people. I feel like I'm an introvert, but I don't feel uncomfortable talking to people, because after experiencing like travel, I just feel like most people just want the same things. Most people just want to be happy and safe and comfortable, and I think that's been the kind of most helpful thing. It's also helped me build a bit more confidence, because then I feel like my voice is, I shouldn't feel self-conscious about my voice as much, because everybody also feels the same as you. We all kind of collectively feel some of the things that maybe we're not as proud to talk about or feel shy about talking about, but everybody feels them. So it's given me a lot more confidence to create the work that I want to create without feeling shy or exposed. I feel a lot more safe and comfortable in being vulnerable and being honest, from my experiences of travel, because we all are, I think it's just whether we decide if we want to talk about it or not.
I love that message to wrap up the episode. And before we say goodbye, I always like to play a game with my guests, just to end in a high note. So the game is called like finish the sentence. So basically I start the sentence and you have to complete it, right? So I'm going to start.
Let's do it.
I'm proud of myself because...
I can pay the bills. No, I'm proud because I managed to do this. I think, for me, this was always a dream. And actually, I saw like a couple of episodes ago, you had Alex Trochat on here, and he's one of the people who I looked up to for such a long time. And I'm so honored that I get to do this as a job, for a living, and and that I'm sharing a similar platform and getting to talk about it, even though he's like a god. So I feel really fortunate. That's why I'm proud. Sorry, that was a long answer. I don't know if there's points in this game.
You should be proud for sure. So the second is, the best part of being 5 was...
just napping.
Yes.
Napping.
Oh my god. I continue napping. I do nap on weekends.
Again, this is a thing that maybe if this is going out to potential clients, I'm always awake. Napping. Oh yeah. Guilt-free naps, maybe.
Oh yes.
Is probably the better ones.
I love those. Third one, I'm terrible at...
Oh god. Excel spreadsheets.
Oh, yes.
My wife is very good at those, so that's our dynamic.
Again, what a match. Amazing. You're so lucky. So one day I'm going to...
Go to space, hopefully. That would be cool.
I'm always chosen first when it comes to...
See, the answer should be like Pictionary or one of those drawings games, but again, it's not. It's probably like a word. Like I love word scrambles, so probably that. I don't know why. That's such a random thing.
I couldn't do without...
Oh, hot sauce. Oh my god.
hot sauce.
But probably actually micheladas, which is like the the spicy beers.
Oh, yes.
God.
God,
Oh.
amazing. Oh, I need one now.
Now I want one now.
It's 11 in the morning, but...
It's always michelada o'clock.
Yes. And last one. If I wouldn't be doing this for a living, I would be...
I really liked like law growing up, so maybe something to do with law, but realistically probably not. Probably like, I don't know, an accountant or like something boring. I don't know.
You like law and you chose art? What a missed opportunity.
Yeah. No, it's really not. I would have been the worst. I would have. Do you know Lionel Hutz from The Simpsons? I would have been like that. I would have been that. That's the degree of lawyer that I would have been. So I think it's probably for the best.
Amazing, Karen. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Where can people find you?
Thanks for having me, Martina. I am on Instagram, just made by Karan, and also my website, madebykaran.com.
Yeah, and you have an amazing shop on your website. So I'm going to add this also to our show notes so that people can find you. Thanks again for chatting with me today. It was so fun and also very insightful on your journey and all of the things that were important for you and also for your career. And I think this is going to be super insightful for our listeners. So I appreciate that openness.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Amazing. And thank you everybody for listening. See you on the next episode of Open Studio. Bye bye.
See ya.
So this is it. I hope you loved this episode. You can find me, the host of the show, on social networks at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. If you loved this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode of Martina Flor's Open Studio. Bye-bye.